Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. We love to go deep on fascinating topics, and today we're looking at something pretty unique.
Yeah, this should be interesting.
We've got this text arguing that you can learn English
Yeah.
by kind of weaving it into your morning routine.
Yeah, using those everyday activities like making your coffee or even hitting the snooze button to boost your vocabulary.
As it's the idea, anyway.
Sounds pretty clever, right?
Definitely different. So the text starts off by, emphasizing how important a solid morning routine is, and there's this phrase, starting on the right foot.
Right. So, I mean, think about it when you start your day with a clear plan and like a routine.
You set yourself up for success.
Exactly. And routines, they actually can, reduce that decision fatigue. So you free up more mental energy for tougher things.
Like learning new language.
Exactly.
I never thought about it like that, but that makes sense.
Yeah, and the text goes on to talk about the need for, being intentional, being proactive with your routine.
So how do those concepts apply to something like, just your morning routine?
Well, intentionality really just means being mindful of your actions and having a purpose. So you're actively thinking about what you want to get out of your morning instead of just going through the motions.
Yeah, sure.
And then being proactive means anticipating those obstacles, planning ahead. So if you always hit snooze and miss your language practice,
And
well,
put the alarm across the room.
right. Or maybe set a little reward for yourself for actually getting up on time.
I like that idea. Okay, so we've got the right mindset. We have a good routine in place. Now the text actually takes us to that first moment of the day.
Waking up.
And it talks about all these different sounds. Your alarm could be buzzing or ringing or chiming. I mean,
There are so many words for that.
I know I'd never even thought about that before.
It's funny how each word gives you a slightly different feeling, like a buzzing alarm might feel jarring, whereas a chiming alarm.
That'd be more gentle.
Right. So think about how these sounds actually affect your mood, your motivation, which in turn can affect your language learning.
So like a gentle wake-up call could make you more receptive to absorbing new information.
Possibly, yeah.
That's really interesting. I
Yeah.
usually wake up to my phone's default alarm, which is definitely more of a buzz.
Uh,
I might have to try a gentler sound.
yeah, made a shot.
Okay, so the alarm goes off, and then the text describes that feeling of being groggy and bleary-eyed. Is there a way to use this feeling to our advantage?
Definitely. I think just recognizing and naming those feelings is the first step to actually overcoming them.
Interesting.
So instead of hitting snooze, try incorporating a quick activity that gently kind of wakes up your mind, like you could listen to a short English podcast.
Oh, while you're still in bed.
Yeah. Or even just practice saying those words groggy and bleary-eyed out loud.
To get them in your head.
Right. It's about incorporating those small, manageable steps into what you're already doing.
Small steps lead to big changes.
That's the idea.
But let's be honest, that snooze button is tempting.
Oh, yeah.
And the text actually talks about hitting snooze as a form of procrastination when it comes to language learning.
Makes sense.
I know I'm guilty of that.
Yeah, well, it's a common struggle for sure. Just hitting snooze delays the inevitable. Putting off language practice, it just pushes back your progress.
Sure.
But, instead of beating ourselves up about it, let's think of strategies to combat this.
Okay.
What if you put your phone or your alarm across the room so you have to get out of bed to turn it off?
You have to.
Or maybe you set a motivating reward for getting up on time, like, I don't know, listening to your favorite English podcast.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, we are finally up, and the text takes us to morning hygiene.
The essentials.
It seems simple, but the text mentions some interesting vocabulary here, like lather, exfoliate, and even ablutions.
Now, that one, ablutions, that's a less common term for washing.
Yeah, what's that about?
Well, it often has these cultural and historical connotations. So in some cultures, ablutions are part of religious rituals, emphasizing purification, cleanliness.
So just one word can have such a rich background.
It can.
And the text even suggests using this vocabulary in your head as you're going through your routine.
Right. It's about making that conscious effort to connect the words with the actions. So instead of just brushing your teeth, you might think, I'm lathering the toothpaste on my toothbrush.
It sounds a little silly, but I can see how that would help.
It's powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And speaking of rituals, the text then dives into breakfast, which it calls the most important meal of the day.
You got to fuel the brain.
That's what they say.
Yeah, and your brain needs that energy for learning, right?
Right, so the text brings in words like hearty, light, on the go, nutritious, even verbs like scramble brew and savory.
It's a whole breakfast vocabulary menu.
It is. I'm definitely going to try and use some of these words when I'm making breakfast.
Do it.
But are there other ways to connect breakfast and language learning?
Oh, absolutely. Think about incorporating English language media into your breakfast routine. Well, maybe you watch a cooking show or listen to a podcast about food while you eat.
Okay.
And you're passively absorbing all this vocabulary related to food and cooking without even realizing you're studying.
I could do that. Okay, so we've covered waking up hygiene breakfast, and now the text recommends two other key activities: listening to podcasts and reading news articles.
Two great ways to get exposed to some authentic English.
Podcasts especially are good for learning natural pronunciation and intonation.
That's what we're doing right now.
That's right. And the text even gives us some helpful vocabulary for podcasts like transcript, narrative, host, even insightful. Mm. But news articles feel a little more challenging.
It can be, but it's also really rewarding,
Yeah.
you know? And remember, you don't have to read the entire newspaper, just focus on the sections that you're actually interested in.
Like if you're into tech, start with the tech section.
Exactly. Or if you love sports, dive into the sports news.
Okay, so it's about finding what you like.
Yeah, make language learning relevant and enjoyable.
So we've covered waking up, hygiene, breakfast, podcast, news articles. Is there anything else we can add to this language learning routine?
Well, the text wraps up by introducing a few advanced vocabulary words that relate to productivity and fitness.
Like what?
Well, you've got prioritize, efficient mindset, and overwhelmed, all falling under that productivity umbrella.
Okay.
And then for fitness, you've got stretch, endorphins, stamina, and regimen.
That's a lot of words.
It is.
How do those tie back to language learning, though?
It's all about taking care of your physical and mental well-being, which can indirectly benefit your language learning.
So if you're stressed, you're not going to learn as well.
Exactly. But if you prioritize your well-being, maybe by, incorporating some stretching or exercise into your morning, you're setting yourself up for a more productive and enjoyable learning experience.
So understanding these words lets you actually talk about these concepts in English.
Exactly.
So it's like a holistic approach to language learning.
Mm-hmm.
You're not just focusing on the vocabulary and grammar. You're creating a supportive environment for yourself to actually learn.
Right. It's all about finding what works for you and making language learning a natural part of your day.
I really like this approach.
Me too. And the best part is you can start incorporating these ideas into your routine right away, even with just small, manageable changes.
That's encouraging. So far, we've laid the groundwork for how to actually transform a morning routine into a tool for learning English. I'm excited to see what other insights the text has to offer.
Well, in the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore a specific example of how to actually weave all this vocabulary into a morning routine.
I can't wait. Stay tuned, everyone. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground, from ablutions to, savory breakfasts, and I'm starting to see how these pieces fit together. Does the text give us any concrete examples of what this language learning morning routine might look like?
Actually, yeah, it does. There's a sample podcast script.
Oh, perfect.
That shows us exactly how to weave this vocabulary into a real-life scenario.
I'm all ears.
So imagine you're listening to a podcast, right? And the host says something like, "Good morning, everyone. Today we're uncovering the secrets to a really effective morning routine. We'll explore everyday vocabulary that'll help you sound more fluent in your daily conversations."
Okay, so it's a mini lesson right from the start.
Exactly. And then they guide the listener through the different stages of a morning routine, for example. They might say, let's start with waking up. Are you someone who reaches for the snooze button, or do you spring out of bed feeling refreshed? Remember that word groggy to describe that hazy feeling before you've fully woken up?
I like how they snuck in that vocab word we talked about earlier.
Yeah, it feels natural, right?
Totally. What happens next in this example?
Well, then they move on to breakfast, and they might say something like, next, let's talk about fueling our bodies with a good breakfast. Do you prefer a hearty meal, or are you more of a grab-and-go type? Words like nutritious and brew will come in handy when you're describing your favorite breakfast items.
It's like they're giving you the words and then showing you how to use them in conversation.
Exactly. And then to wrap up the routine, they might touch on productivity and say, last but not least, let's think about setting ourselves up for a productive day. Do you plan your day meticulously, prioritizing tasks, or do you dive right in? Using terms like mindset and efficient can really elevate your vocabulary.
I love how they encourage using those more advanced terms.
Yeah, and it's not just about, stating the facts. The host uses these vivid descriptions like savoring a hearty meal or, grabbing a quick bite.
It's definitely more engaging than just saying, eat breakfast.
Right, and it makes it more memorable.
It reminds me of how much easier it is to learn a new word when you encounter it in a story.
Absolutely. We learn language through context, So don't be afraid to play with language, experiment with new words, and just find ways to make them stick.
This podcast script is a great example of how something as simple as a morning routine can be a language learning opportunity. It's not just about memorizing, it's about integrating those words into your life.
Exactly. Finding what works for you and making language learning just a natural extension of your day.
I love that. And you know what really struck me is that emphasis on mindfulness.
Yeah.
It's not just going through the motions, it's about paying attention to what you're doing and how you describe it.
It's like you become the narrator of your own life in English.
Right. But what if someone's morning is already packed? How do they fit in more language practice?
That's a good question. And honestly, it doesn't have to be this huge time commitment.
Okay.
Even small tweaks can make a difference. So maybe you spend 5 minutes listening to an English podcast while you brush your teeth, or you challenge yourself to describe your breakfast using new words.
By finding those pockets of time.
Exactly. Just make them work for you.
Those are great suggestions. It's encouraging to know that even small efforts can add up.
Consistency is key. Think of it like building a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. And don't be afraid to get creative with it. Turn it into a game. Challenge yourself to use a new word every day or describe your surroundings as you go through your routine.
I love that idea. It's about making it fun, not just another thing on the to-do list.
Exactly.
Speaking of to-do lists, I think it's time to move on to the last part of our deep dive, where we wrap up everything we've learned.
Sounds good.
So we've explored all these fascinating ideas about turning a morning routine into, like a secret weapon for learning English.
Yeah, it's amazing how much we can learn from something we do every day.
For me, I think one of the biggest takeaways is that language learning, it doesn't have to be this, separate daunting task.
Right.
It can be something that we weave into our lives and make
Yeah.
it more natural.
Absolutely. And when you can integrate language practice into your daily routines and rituals, it becomes less about, studying and more about just living your life.
I like that.
Yeah, just with that added layer of awareness and intention.
And it's not just passively absorbing words.
Yeah.
The text talked about the power of, vivid and descriptive language.
Oh, yeah. It's about moving beyond just the dictionary definition of a word and actually using it in a way that captures those nuances and paints a picture for the listener.
Right. So it's about becoming a more expressive communicator.
Exactly.
So for everyone listening, I encourage you to take these ideas and experiment in your own lives. Maybe challenge yourself to describe your breakfast using new words, or listen to an English podcast while you're getting ready.
Even the small changes can make a difference.
Just a small step towards making language learning more a part of your day.
And remember, it's a journey, not a race. So be patient with yourself and celebrate your progress. Don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Because those are opportunities to learn.
Exactly.
It's been great diving into this topic with you.
Likewise.
I feel inspired to look at my own morning routine with new eyes and see all the learning opportunities. I'm sure our listeners feel the same.
I hope so. And remember, even small, consistent efforts can lead to big progress over time. So start incorporating some of these ideas tomorrow and see what happens.
That's a fantastic note to end on. Thank you for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those morning routines strong.
CSI.